Hey there, it's time for the show, the Tatiana Show, where you make friends and talk life and crypto. Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Tatiana Show. Josh is traveling today and stuck in a place that has bad internet, despite his best efforts to call ahead and secure it. Nonetheless, it didn't work. You know, the perils of travel. But I just got back in from Pork Fest, and I got in really quickly, and I tried to clean my place because I have this really awesome interview last week. If you've been listening to the Tatiana Show, you know that I was interviewing presidential candidate for the Libertarian Party, Jo Jorgensen. And today we're going to talk with Spike Cohen. He's the vice presidential candidate for the Libertarian Party, and he has an extremely exciting name for a libertarian person. Spike is very like, hey, we're here to make it fun and also kick some A. I'm going to leave the SS off of that one just to keep it clean for the kids.
We'll keep it family friendly for the kids, right?
Yeah. I hope so. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Oh, absolutely. Thanks for having me on. I've been looking forward to it all day.
Okay, well, that's very kind of you. So before we kind of unwrap, you know, what you guys are running on and a little bit about that, could you give people a bit of background about you? I know you have 2 different podcasts that you're running every week, but how did you get involved in Liberty, and just, you know, what are you working on besides running for vice president?
Sure. So for those who don't know, I actually started a web design company back in 1999, right before I turned 17. And I grew that into a pretty successful company. And I actually used to be a neocon. So when I was kind of growing my company in my early 20s, I was a neocon coming out of 9/11, very much into the whole idea that, you know, the terrorists attacked us because they hated our freedoms and we needed to spread freedom and democracy around the world with bombs. I mean, it sounds absurd now, but at the time I totally was bought into it. We needed to invade their countries and show them our peaceful ways. And I bought the whole thing. And there was this annoying guy named Ron Paul who kept saying that 9/11 was not because anyone hated us for our freedom. It was blowback for, you know, U.S. occupation and destabilization of the Middle East, and that we had actually created Al-Qaeda, and that, you know, this was all blowback for our actions, and that there would be continued blowback and continued new creation of terrorist groups, and that, you know, we would just waste, you know, trillions of dollars in trying to fight a boogeyman. And end up just causing immeasurable harm to the region and making things worse, and having thousands of American troops die as a result, and thousands more suffer from trauma and you know and psychological problems and everything else. I thought, this guy hates America. I hate this guy. Every year, everything he said would happen happened, and it just kept happening. At the same time, growing my business, as my business grew, I saw more and more pushback from government. It was harder and harder and harder for me to actually provide services, or it wasn't really that it was harder. It was just they were taking more and more of my money. And I thought, well, why are they taking my money? And then I realized this guy had been telling me why they were taking my money: to pay for this empire that was doing us no good and leading to people, you know, coming home in caskets draped with flags, and many more coming home, you know, wishing they had died over there. And not to mention, obviously, the countless people that did die over there that you know, had their homes invaded and their countries invaded, and were, you know, had their communities destabilized by a foreign entity. And so all of those things combined really made me start thinking, I don't think I like the government. And so I kind of worked my way from being a neocon to more of a, I guess, constitutionalist, paleocon, you know, conservative type. And just the longer I spent time talking about it, then I started reading The Law by Bastiat, and I started reading Spooner, and I started reading Hayek and von Mises and Rothbard and Kropotkin. And before I knew it, I was one of those libertarians. And that was sometime around 06, 07, something like that. And I kind of took that journey. And then 3 years ago, I decided to sell my company and retire from web design so that I could focus my life on what really mattered to me at that point, which was spreading the message of liberty. I saw that the cultural conversation in this country was so skewed towards statism. We see it now. There's just basically 2 large arguing sides that are just arguing over how much bigger government should be, and where government should grow more than where it should grow, you know, less, and, you know, how much more power it should have over our lives, how much more control it should have, how much less control we should have, how much how much our own personal freedom is actually a hindrance to us and all of this. And I realized we need to change the conversation our way to why government should even be involved in this in the first place. The fact that government creates these problems, the fact that we would do better, on our own, working voluntarily through the spontaneous nature of humans in a market, which is just people, working together in cooperation and competition as opposed to coercion. And so that led me to becoming the host of My Fellow Americans, the co-host of the Muddy Waters of Freedom, and the co-owner of Muddy Waters Media. And we've done a great job using entertainment to reach outside of liberty circles. So not just outside of the Libertarian Party, but even outside of kind of liberty adjacent circles into just the general public, and using entertainment as a way to kind of bring them in and have them hear a libertarian message. And so to that, and 6 months ago, I decided, or I guess 7 months ago now, I decided to run for the party's vice presidential nomination, because I felt like this was now the next opportunity for me to be able to spread that message of liberty and share it to a general public, leveraging this campaign as a way to let people know that they own themselves and their lives and their bodies and their labor and the product of their labor and their property, and to talk to them about ideas like non-aggression through the filter of saying the Republicans and the Democrats have done these terrible things to you, and we have common sense libertarian solutions. Those solutions just happen to be filtered back to self-ownership and all of the ethos behind libertarianism. So that's why I'm here.
Well, I'm happy that you are such a great voice for liberty. You're
Thank
so
you.
articulate. But, I do have concerns around the ability to spread the message, because right now, and we spoke about this last week with Jo, but can I call her Jo? I don't know. Anyway,
Jo is fine.
we were talking.
Jo or Dr. Jorgensen, either one's fine.
Okay. Well, so she and I were speaking about how, there's all this censorship on Facebook and on all the different social media platforms. I don't normally promote shows, but I actually wanted to promote last week's show because it was really popular and something that I believe in. I think it's important to have another voice. And Facebook is saying, oh, we need your firstborn. We need you to wait a week. We need you to, give us your blood first and get a COVID and, installation, all things just to do an ad. And you've got all these algorithms that are sort of inflaming the worst parts of us. And libertarianism is a common sense solution. I think that's a great point, and a lot of people could get behind it. How do you cut through the barriers that are already there through these entrenched tech companies that have taken over social media?
Well, and that's the problem, because we're kind of stopped at all levels, right? The government won't let us through. The major media, dying TV and radio mainstream media, they're doing their best to try to keep us out. And while we have the most success on social media, there's certainly some pushback whenever we get too much traction. I remember what they did to Liberty memes. They got big enough, they put some stuff out, and then they found the flimsiest of excuses to basically deplatform them for quite a while. And so here's the problem. The problem isn't necessarily that the social media companies are deciding what is or is not allowed on their platforms. We believe in property rights. If you own something, you should be able to say what can and can't be there. The problem is that they've leveraged the government to choke off competition, to create a series of barriers and regulations that make it harder and harder to actually create a successful competing social media platform. And we see this in everything. They do this in education, they do this in healthcare, they do this in every sector of the economy. The cronies come in and they use their favored Republican and Democrat politicians to get their favored regulations and legislation signed into law or passed into the regulatory structure. And that makes it so that new people can't come in. And then that allows them to operate as not necessarily a monopoly, but a cartel amongst them. So you've got Facebook, Google, which owns YouTube, you've got Twitter, you've got a handful of others, and they're kind of choking off the market. So if they all have a kind of common idea of what should or shouldn't be allowed, it effectively works out as censorship, even though it's not government stepping in and stopping stopping things from happening. It's still private actors using government to choke off all the other competition so that they themselves can decide what is or is not going to be said. Now, unfortunately, a lot of people take the wrong lesson from that. They'll say the government needs to step in and tell them they can't censor. The last thing you want, if you want social media and the internet to be as free of a place as possible, the absolute last thing that you want is for government to get even more involved. Because if government starts setting the stage for what is and isn't allowed, I guarantee you we're not going to be treated well. Maybe Republicans will be treated well, and maybe Democrats will be treated well. We will absolutely not be treated well. That will be the death knell of our presence on social media. But so to that end, I think that from a policy standpoint, the most important thing is to remove those barriers once we're in. To answer your question in terms of what do we do in the meantime, we've been really doing a great job with viral marketing. We are meeting or exceeding all of our benchmarks that we've set for getting volunteers, for donations, for general reach. We're exceeding everything that we were hoping to do point by point, because the ultimate goal is to get Jo Jorgensen on the debate stage. And if that may have been a question you were going to ask, so I hope I didn't take that from you just now. But if we can get that 15% in the opinion polls before Labor Day, or I guess or by Labor Day, I think the cutoff's either by or just after Labor Day, she'll qualify to be on those debates. If we can get Jo Jorgensen on those debates, you talk to her firsthand. Imagine her between Donald Trump and Joe Biden, two men who can barely form a coherent sentence between the two of them, unless there's a teleprompter in front of them. And they are both knee deep to blame for all of the problems that we're facing right now. These are two people, one a career politician and one a career crony turned politician, who are emblematic of all of the problems that the Republicans and Democrats and their government solutions have done to us, all of the inequitable and harmful and abusive outcomes that have come from it. And then in the middle, you have Jo Jorgensen, a absolutely brilliant, self-made entrepreneur, a woman who can lead from day one, a senior lecturer and a great orator who's able to break down complex ideas into a way that connects with everyday Americans, and who can demonstrate point by point and case by case and break down in a clear and understandable way exactly how those two and their parties have created the problems that we face, and how common sense libertarian solutions are the way out of them.
Do you have a concern that, well, first of all, I mean, the chances of you guys winning, not to be a jerk or anything, are, based on previous experiences, are not very high. Would you say that you guys are trying to win, or do you think it's a battle of ideas? And I mean, do you think that that's even possible? Because I think the system is so rigged. Like when I saw what happened with Ron Paul in 2012, right?
Mm-hmm.
The RNC, they changed all their rules and they all walked out. All those delegates, they walked out. 400 people walked out. You didn't even get coverage, right? So they're changing the rules. They changed the rules for the Democrats for the past 2 times, right? Hillary, whatever, a bunch of lies. Mm-hmm. They kept Gary out, and I believe that that was a legal battle that was won after many years. Isn't that a little bit discouraging? And how do you kind of get around that and feel like, as a, I love libertarians and I'm not, oh, Biden is so great or Trump is so great, but I worry that maybe I'm throwing away my vote. It seems like maybe Biden would be a lot worse than Trump. So how do you kind of balance all those kinds of concerns that you think voters have?
Well, let me answer your first question first. A vote thrown away is voting for the people who created these problems and then told you that they're the solution. This time, they are finally going to fix those problems that they just keep creating and making worse. Now is the time that they are going to finally fix everything. They just need this vote one last time. That's a vote thrown away. That is, throwing your vote away is continuing to vote for the same foxes that keep just failing to guard the henhouse, but they swear this time they're going to fix that henhouse door. This time they're going to keep their fellow foxes out. That's a wasted vote. So to your first question about, are we trying to win, or is this a battle for ideas? We are running to win, and we do know what we face, and we do know what the obstacles are. We do know what the historic record for third parties and the Libertarian Party are, but we are running to win. And with the idea that however well we do, whether we win or we just get a record number of votes, whatever we end up doing, we will have pushed those ideas and spread that and moved that needle of the cultural conversation towards us as much as possible. But I'm a strong believer in, if you are trying to compete for something, you compete to win. No matter how high the odds are, you compete to win. Because especially for something like this, the better we do, the better we are doing for the down ballot races and the more we've affected the cultural conversation. And B, if I go into something and say, hey, listen, I'm running for this, I know I'm not going to win, but here's really what I want to do. That just sucks all the morale out of the people that are out there knocking on doors and making phone calls and getting petition signed and everything else. We have to fight to win. And I will say, maybe I'm a hopeless optimist, but I will say this. If we get Jo Jorgensen on that debate stage, Gary Johnson and Bill Weld, they got 13% and 11%. So they were within spitting distance of getting on that 15%. I believe, and what has happened in that 4 years' time? Major media has been that much less of the share of how people get their news, and social media has taken up that slack, and we do much better on social media than we do with the lamestream media. So we get onto social media. I believe we're able to get that 15% to get her on the debate stage, and if we can do that, in my mind, all bets are off. I think that'll be an emperor has no clothes moment. Remember, the last time we had a third-party candidate who got on the debate, he could have won. Ross Perot could have won. He decided to drop out because he never wanted to win. He just wanted to destroy Bush's chances. Once the polls started showing him in number one, he came up with that flimsy excuse and he dropped out. And then he came back into the race, 2 or 3 weeks before the race started, just to make sure that he spoiled Bush's chances. But he overshot himself. I don't think he realized he was going to do that well. All it took was that man who everyone saw as a joke up until then. Everyone saw Ross Perot as the joke, this little funny-talking billionaire who was wasting all of his money. He got on that debate stage, and everyone realized he was so much better than the other two options. He made so much more sense. This silly little man made so much more sense. That was an emperor has no clothes moment when people thought, oh, they're the wasted votes. He's the real shot here. He's the one that makes the most sense. If we get Jo Jorgensen on that stage, we'll have that same moment. And I believe that she can win it. And if we don't win it, if we only come in second, or if we just do better than we've ever done before, that helps the down ballot races. That gets the conversation change in our direction. It gets a record number of people into the Libertarian Party. It secures 50 state ballot access. It secures us as minor party status, which makes it a lot easier for us to be able to. We aren't now spending millions of dollars and countless man hours just to get on the ballot. It gets us that status where we are automatically on ballots. It does a lot for us. But we're running to win, and I know the odds are obviously high, and we have quite a challenge ahead of us. But I believe if everything works right, we will absolutely be able to win this race.
I like your positivity. I was a little doubtful, but man, you're making me buy it. I like it. I'm getting excited. Okay,
we got a chance. I'm telling you, there's a chance.
Well, God knows we need one right now because it's freaking bananas out there. Mm-hmm. Okay, so now I'm going to shift gears a little bit. We've got this big problem right now. There's a lot of protests around racial inequality. And then, people are talking a lot about defunding the police. To me, one of the missing parts of that conversation is the incentives for police and what is the policeman's job, right? The police are there to collect fines, torture you for stupid crap like jaywalking, and then throw you in jail for joints. That's what they're there for. If you I watched this Ben Swan, I keep referencing this. I watched a Ben Swan report, and some of these major cities are getting as much as 30% of their revenue from police, basically being their tax collectors, right? With their little fines and their parking tickets, right? Yep. People are, we're not going to have a chokehold. But the real problem is that how many times are we interacting with police for no freaking reason, for just stupid stuff? And that to me would warrant a discussion about the drug war. Now, I know that you wrote a really great piece about in support of Ross Ulbricht, so I'd love to give you a chance to talk a little bit more about that. But if you could also speak a little bit more broadly to how do we solve some of these problems that are going on in the world around police brutality and even the concept of having competitive police forces. Can you speak to some of those ideas?
So here's where the problem is at the federal level, because that's obviously what we're running for. We can give our opinion on how community policing should work, but we're running to change how things are happening at the federal level. Thankfully, this is a problem that is largely at the federal level. There are many, many problems here, and I'll touch upon them. I mean, we could spend 2 hours talking about this. I routinely talk about this on my show and on different appearances, but I'll break down as best I can here. First of all, they're not being held accountable. Police, government officials, politicians are not being held accountable because of qualified immunity, which the Supreme Court introduced as a ridiculous, nonsensical legal doctrine in the 1950s and 60s in order to give the government cover to brutalize civil rights and anti-war protesters. That's the whole reason this exists, is that they created this legal doctrine out of thin air. It has absolutely nothing to do with any rules on the books. They basically said that no government official, politician, a bureaucrat, a police officer, no one can be held accountable, no one can be sued if they believe that what they did was reasonably expected within the course of their operations. In other words, imagine if you could go into court and say, Your Honor, I know I'm being charged with murder and all that, but I think what I did was perfectly reasonable. And the judge goes, oh, well, if you thought it was reasonable, I guess I got to drop the charges. That's what qualified immunity is. And it's gotten worse over time. They've added one ridiculous doctrine after the next. Here's what qualified immunity is. It incentivizes bad policing, and here's why. Derek Chauvin, the man who killed George Floyd, the man who murdered George Floyd, he had 17 other complaints against him, including wrongful death. He'd already murdered other people. And the Minneapolis Police Department is looking at Derek Chauvin and going, this is a bad cop. He's causing a lot of problems here. But he's also not costing us anything because of qualified immunity. So it's not costing us anything. And if we tried to fire him, that would cost us a lot because we'd have to fight the police union. So as a cost-benefit analysis, we got to keep the bad cop on. So that incentivizes bad policing. And it disincentivizes, it punishes good policing, because if you try to hold one of your fellow cops accountable, that's just going to come back on you because you're not keeping the thin blue line. And that cop's never going to be held accountable. So why should you stick your neck out? And so it encourages bad policing. So that needs to go right away. The next problem is, like you were saying, the police are used as a revenue protection mechanism / criminalization desensitization mechanism. They want people, when they see cops, to go, what am I doing wrong? Oh my gosh, I must be doing something wrong. I'm going to get in trouble now. The reason they're doing that is because they want people, especially people that are in marginalized communities, the poor, people of color, migrants, gender and sexual minorities, people that are not the people that the system was designed to help. So if you're poor, you're homeless, you're in a bad situation, you're an addict, you're a person of color or whatever, this is even more disproportionately going against you, but really it's going against all of us. Whenever we see the police, we go, what do? Am I doing something? Did I, if you're high, you're like, I got to maintain, even if you're just sitting there. Okay. I've been sober for 14 years. I remember what it's like to see a cop high, and I go, now I'm sober. I see a cop. I still go, oh, well, what am I doing? Am I doing something wrong? Is my blinker on? It's just stupid stuff, because we know that they're going to come and they're going to give us that fine. Why? And now, thankfully, I'm in a financial situation. Exactly. And I'm in a financial situation where it's an inconvenience. You charge me $200 because, my seatbelt wasn't on or some stupid nonsense. Okay, fine, whatever. There are people that ruins them financially for weeks or months. So when they see a cop, they feel major resentment, because this person could ruin my life over something that has nothing to do with harming anyone. I'm not even talking the drug war. I'm talking the war on broken taillights. I'm talking the war on wearing your seatbelt or not, or on your if your license expired a couple days ago or a couple weeks ago, stuff that has no victim whatsoever, but they ruin your life over it. And what this does is it drives a rift between the police and the public, and justifiably so. If we're going to have police, if the government is going to provide police, when you see a police officer, all you should know is that officer is there to protect your lives and your rights and your property, and that's it. That's it. They shouldn't be there to give you a hard time and issue a fine over something that doesn't hurt anyone. They should definitely not be there to throw you in a cage for, not obeying whatever bylaw that doesn't hurt anyone, including anything related to drugs. And they definitely shouldn't be using disproportionate force on you anytime you say, excuse me, why are you giving me a hard time? Or, you give them some lip or whatever, so they beat you up, because they're not allowed to do that. And yet with qualified immunity, there's nothing we can do about it. So qualified immunity ends. The war on drugs ends. Civil asset forfeiture, what the government takes from you before you even go to trial. And if you're found not guilty or the charges are dropped, you have to sue to get your own stuff back, even though they just determined that they never should have taken it from you in the first place. That ends. No-knock warrants, no-knock raids and warrants ends. Mass warrantless surveillance ends. The militarization program, the 1033 military program, where not only, because we focus on the fact that the police are getting these tanks, that's a problem, but they're also getting the training. The military industrial complex is dropping their surplus on the police So they're co-opting the police to prison industrial complex by dropping their surplus on it, but then they're sending their contractors. It's a jobs program. The contractors are still in business, teaching people how to use these old weapon systems that have been determined to be obsolete on the battlefield. But what are they doing? They're using the same training that they use to train military people who are going overseas to fight heavily armed, CIA armed enemy combatants. And so now the police are getting this training and then unleashed in our communities. They've been taught how to use tanks and mine-resistant armored personnel carriers and grenade launchers and armed drones and breaching equipment and pepper ball guns and all this stuff. And then they unleash them on the public and go out into the front lines. These aren't the front lines. These are our communities. That program will absolutely end. All of minimum sentencing, federal minimum sentencing guidelines, where judges who get people in front of them who just need a break, who just need some kind of a restorative justice where their victim is made whole and they are put into some kind of program to try to learn how to not do that again and then allowed to go and live their life and thrive, are forced to put them in prison because it says there on the book that, oh, you did this, you got to go 5 years, you got to do 10 years. And then they go into prison and we know what happens. They have to get hard so that they can survive. They come out, they're broken. The world looks different than it was when they came out. Their credit's ruined because their social security number was flying out there and they had no way to fight against all the stuff that was being run up in their name. They have a felony record so they can't get a good job. They probably can't even leave the state. And so now what? They got to choose between abject poverty or getting some terrible wage slave job that isn't going to get them anywhere, or going back to crime, which is what they know at this point. And that's why the recidivism rate is as high as it is. And it's intended that way because most states have a minimum quota of people who have to be in prison, a minimum quota of you that have to be in prison at any given time so that they can keep their contracts with for-profit prison labor contractors using free slave prison labor that they make billions of dollars doing. One of the companies, Unicor, is actually, can you tell I care about this? One of the companies is actually listed on the stock market. That's how profitable it is. All these things have to end because they need to be held accountable. They need to stop incentivizing bad policing. They need to stop using the police as revenue collection mechanisms, and they need to stop militarizing them and desensitizing people to being criminalized so that they eventually just accept going to prison to do slave labor. All of that needs to end, and it will end when Jo Jorgensen is president.
I can get behind all of that. But there's so much money in the drug market. There are all these CIA black ops that are funded through that. I remember hearing somebody from one of these police, against prohibition organizations saying that if they ended the drug war, the entire world economy would collapse. And we're obviously over budgeted. This was a guy that was against the drug war, right? And that's where all the dirty money, it's like kind of flowing around and pumping the world with his black oil, so to speak. So how can you dismantle such a mess? To me, it's almost like this country should just completely collapse and start over, which I don't want, considering everything that I've been seeing in the streets lately. Super scary. Seems like a commie takeover. Not a fan. But how do you actually do that if all the budgets are so out of whack? I mean, the national budget is like $1 bajillion, right? But even cities, states, everybody is completely over leveraged. So how do you even implement something like that if there's so much incentive for it to keep going, other than from the people, because the people don't like it?
You end the war on drugs and the militarization of the police and the police to prison complex, the military industrial complex, the wars, you end them all the same way. You end the Fed. The American people would have never agreed to be taxed directly to pay for all this stuff. If the government had to go to the people and say, listen, we got to raise your taxes to 85% because we want to, bomb most of the world and we want to maintain, forward operations and bases in most countries so that we can keep Raytheon and Northrop Grumman and Blackwater and Boeing profitable and to keep you scared so that you keep voting for us and letting us take more and more of your freedoms. We need to keep this NSA program where we basically tap into every single thing you do on the phone or online, and that we need to maintain a supercomputer that's so powerful that we have to divert rivers to cool it because it's putting off that much heat. That we need to maintain this stuff just to spy on you and every day what you're doing on your phone and on emails and everything else. And we need to make sure that a certain number of you are in prison at any given time so that private for profit prison labor contractors can make a fortune off of the sweat and toil of you and your back. And we need to keep systemic racism in place so that we can marginalize entire communities and keep them under, so that, that way they can never get ahead. And we need to basically keep most people under so that they can never get ahead. But we need to raise your taxes to pay for it. People would say, absolutely not. That's ridiculous. They figured out an end run. In 1913, they created the Fed. What does the Fed do? The Fed prints out as much money as the government tells them to. And they do many things with it. We just saw they bailed out Wall Street and big banks and airlines and everything else. But the other thing they do is they lend unlimited amounts of money to the federal government. They buy treasury bonds. So the Federal Reserve is kept as a non-government entity, a private entity who just so happens to do what the government tells it to do. And they lend money to the government in the form of buying treasury bonds that we then have to pay with interest. 40-year bonds. We have to pay it. Our children have to pay it. Their children have to pay it. Their children have to pay it every time they do it. What an insidious way to take from people, to take without even asking, without even telling them what they're going to do, to just take as a matter of course and then make us pay the interest on it. And then at the same time, by printing out these endless reams of money and inflating the money supply without adding any additional value, they deride and reduce the value over time of those same Federal Reserve notes that we have in our wallets and in our bank accounts that we use to buy everything that we have to buy to live, because we're forced by law to use it because of the tax code. So we're forced to use that currency. So we would end the Fed, and we would end the federal government's monopoly on the issuance and distribution of currency, and allow the free market to provide, where they could have competition, competing providers competing to provide you with ever stronger and more valuable and sound forms of currency. Because now the people giving you currency have a vested interest, not in just printing out endless amounts because you have to use it. Now they have a vested interest in having you choose them instead of someone else, because they make a little piece of it whenever you use it. And they know that if they printed out endless amounts of it, you just stop using it. You go find someone else. So by removing the monopoly and allowing the market to provide, it fixes so many problems. It fixes inflation. It fixes the growing gap between rich and poor, the growing income inequality. It fixes the boom bust cycle, because the cycle is now the currency and the investment decisions aren't based on boom bust inflation and deflationary periods. It's based on actual supply and demand. But the most important thing, possibly the most important thing, is it ends the empire, because now they have to operate in the same market of currency that everyone else does, instead of imposing their currency on everyone.
I'm down with everything you're saying. And the Fed, I have the signs. But again, like the people in charge of the Fed and all the people that make the money off of it. I mean, some people would say that Kennedy was killed for trying to end the Fed. Right now, Trump is printing like money's going out of style. Some people are saying that he's doing it because then he'll end the Fed after he gives it away to all of his people because he's such a generous man.
Yeah, no.
How do you actually do that kind of thing? Because it's been something that's been talked about for so many years, and it would cause a global economic collapse. Let's say they just audited the Fed. What are they going to find out? Terrible things, nothing good. And
so
and
I want to.
You know,
I want to challenge that real quick, because you've said it twice that the economy is going to collapse if we end the drug war, and the billionaires will collapse. Not all of them. I mean, there are some that have ethically become multimillionaires and billionaires. The elite global corporatist system will collapse. And as it is collapsing even more quickly, the actual economy based on supply and demand, an actual free market, will grow and thrive far faster than that collapse will happen. Because the very nature of, if wealth is now being put into a decentralized, voluntary system of free flow of goods and labor based on supply and demand, that will rise and heal any of the damage caused faster than any collapse could happen as a result of that wealth being taken out of the hands of the cronies and the coercive people. There are three ways that we can interact with each other to distribute scarce resources. One is through cooperation. We can share. One is through competition. We can compete to provide the best value so that we get it, so that I get it instead of you, and vice versa. Or we can use coercion. One of us can put a gun to the other person's head and say, "Give me your money. Do what I say." Government is that third option. It is coercion, and it doesn't work. Not only is it immoral, it doesn't work. Because if I can take from you and everyone else watching and listening to this, I'm not going to be a good steward with what I have. I'm not going to make good decisions because I can just take more whenever I want to. And y'all aren't going to be a good steward of what you have because you know I can come and take it from you at any time. And all of this entire system that has been set up by Republicans and Democrats and their cronies, and not just Republicans and Democrats, but their counterparts in other major developed countries and their cronies, they've set up a system whereby they are taking from all of us as they see fit. And the second that ends, that begins to move towards a system, and it's not going to happen overnight. It's going to be a slow, steady progression once we are in there, once we actually get into positions of power, once it moves towards a more and more voluntary system. Every little bit of collapse that happens that needed to have happened by people that never should have been in those positions that way in the first place will be more than made up for the people rising from the top. New entrepreneurs disrupting the market, providing ever new value and ever new innovations to solve the problems that have been created by the cronies and their favored politicians, their craven and pandering politicians. So I do want to challenge that, but anyway, go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, that's fine. I mean, there's a lot to unpack there. What do you think of like cryptocurrency's role in that, for example? You know, where does crypto have, and are you guys accepting Bitcoin? What's the story?
You know what? Are we accepting Bitcoin? That's actually a good question.
I hope so.
Sure. I want to say we are, but I'm honestly not sure. I just direct people to where they can make donations. joj2020.com/contribute. But in terms of taking, I think so. Here's what I'll say about cryptocurrency. I think personally, I believe it's the future. The beauty of what I'm running for is I don't have to decide what the future is. I simply let the market take its course and let the people who are experts in those fields determine the best way forward. I personally think crypto is going to be the way, whether it's Bitcoin or one of the altcoins or some coin that hasn't even come out yet. I do think that's where we're going. I think that the blockchain system, a digital blockchain system that is both trustless and encrypted, so that you have both privacy and the ability to vet any transaction to make sure that there's no fraudulent activity happening. I think that, and I'm not a blockchain expert. I have a kind of a 30,000 foot view understanding of it, a bird's eye view understanding of it, and I think that or something similar to that, something blockchain based, is definitely going to be the way forward, and not just for currency, for trusts, for situations like determining who owns what property, using a blockchain system of like a property registry so that it's trustless and everyone's on the same page. There are so many ways that the market can provide. We just need to get government out of the way of doing it. If government is to exist, its only purpose should be to protect the lives and rights and property of people and to affirm those things. Anytime it gets into day-to-day life and telling you how to live, what kind of money you should be able to use, that's none of the government's business. And unfortunately, that was one of the first things government started doing when governments first started rising up in Macedonia and Babylon and places like that. They figured out they needed to control the currency. They needed to control what was or was not considered an actual medium that could be traded for goods and services. We don't need that. That needs to end. The market can provide far better than government can.
Yeah, I would say so. And speaking of free markets, right?
Mm-hmm.
You've got a lot of dissatisfied people, and I like that people are protesting, getting out there and trying to be, active. But I feel like their prescription is the wrong prescription for the problem, right? I see, my family's Polish. I'm not really into communism, but a lot of these people are basically really, really far left protesters. And they say things like, oh, eat the rich and capitalism is the devil, blah, blah, blah. That's a pretty big jump for educating people about the benefits of free markets, because I remember, I grew up in New Jersey. It was a Democratic state. So clearly the cool people were the Democrats, and don't you care about the poor people? And what about my health insurance and grandma dying and blah, blah, blah. There's a lot of emotional reasons why people gravitate toward the left, especially when they're young and idealistic. How do we get them a little bit of a reality check on the financial side? Because to me, once I understood economics, that was really the veil was lifted. But economics is not so sexy. What do you do there? How do you kind of lure people in?
So I've been incredibly successful in bringing in one of the things that I did that demonstrated why I'd be a good VP pick is I'd go to Democrat events and poach their supporters, and I go to Republican ones and do it too. Here's the thing, whether you're a Republican who thinks that we need a wall to keep out the scary brown people, or whether you are a Democrat or Democrat leaning person who thinks that, the government needs to protect you from the scary wealthy people. In both cases, they're not looking at the real problem. The problem is the state. You and I know that. But here's the thing. What I've seen, and I've gone knocking on doors in housing projects. I've done college campus tours, both on the actual campus and online during like Zoom calls for different college departments, Emerson University, NYU Film School, NYU Art School, Georgetown University. I know I'm forgetting some others that I've done. Here's what I saw. I saw some incredibly far left people. They were also very anti-authoritarian. They did not like the government. They rightfully recognized that the big players, the big wealthiest people in corporations and the billionaire class of people are a part of government. They recognize that. What they didn't recognize and where they fail or where they're being steered wrong, because ultimately they're lost. They're left behind. You talk to the average college student, they have more existential dread than the average middle-aged person. It's kind of sad because they don't have hope. They are seeing that the cost of living is just stupid. They'll never be able to own a home. They'll never be able to, own their own life. They're going to have student debt for the rest of their life because the cost of living, it's pure economics. The cost of living is just skyrocketed and the wages have stayed roughly the same. And the barriers to entry have just increased over time. They're screwed and they know it. And when they go to their parents and grandparents, they go, well, if you just pull yourself up by your bootstraps, but no one's telling them that the bootstrap license is $100,000. They don't know that. When they're telling their parents that, their parents don't know that because it wasn't like that for them. So they feel alone. They feel left behind. They feel like no one is listening to them. And here comes Bernie Sanders. And he says, this system is screwed up. It has left you behind. It is billionaire cronies in bed with politicians. He is 100% correct. Then he says the answer is to tax all these people and to give you the stuff that you need for free or for very, much more affordable. And to someone who's in that situation, that sounds like the perfect answer. And for anyone who shows up and goes, you can't do that. That'll destroy capitalism. They go, good, fuck cap. Screw capitalists. All right.
It's
gosh
okay.
Darn
we have curses on here sometimes.
Okay. Gosh darn capitalism. Darn it. Darn it to heck. They say, good, I don't care about capitalism. Capitalism, or what I've been told is capitalism, and it's state capitalism. It's not free market capitalism. It is state capitalism, has completely left me behind, let it burn to the ground, and yes, let's eat the rich. I show up and I go, yeah, this system is entirely designed to be against you. They don't care about you. They want you to be a wage slave. And if you end up in prison, they're fine with that too, because they make money on that end anyway. They have criminalized you. They have put in class traders who are looking for the first opportunity to destroy your life over a broken taillight while you sit on 6 figures of student debt because they forced you into that. But then here's how I open with them. I'll ask them, do you think you own yourself? And I get some really depressing answers. Some people say, yeah, of course I own myself. But a lot of them go, I don't think anyone owns anything anymore. I think we're all owned by a rich, wealthy oligarch class and all this stuff. And I'm like, man, these are like 20-year-olds and 19-year-olds saying this. They are freaking horrified. And it's scary. And I'll say, and I'll talk to them about where they are right now, what they're most worried about: student debt, getting a good job, healthcare, all legitimate concerns. And so I start breaking down stuff. I'll say, hey, let me ask you something. What if instead of having to spend 4 to 8 years in school and running up thousands, tens of thousands, or hundreds of thousands in student debt, you could just start apprenticing or interning under someone who does what you want to do. And, however many months later, once you reached a level of mastery, you could just start doing it professionally. And you wouldn't have to pay them anything. You'd either work for free or, you'd get some kind of stipend or whatever, but then you could do it professionally later this year or maybe a year or so from now, depending on what it is you want to do. And they all said, that's great. I'd love to do that. I can't do that. I said, but why? They said, because I have to go to school. I said, yeah, but why? They said, because I have to get a degree. I said, but why? And then they got it because government told them they had to, because occupational licensing laws and other arbitrary restrictions on who can and can't do a thing like braid hair or mow lawns or sell a insurance product or whatever else, you have to spend all this money. And it was designed to lock them out. But to prop up the higher education market, they said, everyone's welcome and we'll even front the bill. And then you got to pay us back, even if you drop out, even if you can't find a job in that field. It was a shell game. And once I say that to them and I say, and the same people who created that shell game are now telling you they just want to take charge of the whole thing and give you what they decide that you deserve. They've already shown you what they decide you deserve, endless suffering for their benefit. That alone tends to disabuse them of what they thought it was. And it happens very, very quickly. Everything kind of unravels over time. I can start telling them why healthcare is something that's best left to the free market. I can give the history of how every time government got involved in healthcare, it just got more and more expensive and harder to get access to, affordable access to, and do it with everything, education, healthcare, and everything else. And you always lean into two things: their natural anti-authoritarian nature and the fact that they recognize that the people in charge hate them or just don't care about them. And if you can lean into those two things, they realize that they're never going to get good options. And it's a process with these Black Lives Matter protesters. They get it when it comes to police brutality. They totally get that the problem is funding and accountability and state violence against people that the people in charge do not care about. All we got to do is agree with them. We're so used to getting into arguments with people. That's what libertarians like to do, right? We like to argue and make people angry at us. And the problem is, that's a great way to win an argument. It's also a great way to have everyone hate us because we systemize things. They do not. They look at things as they're looking right now. Every single individual looks at things with a combination of intellect, intuition, and emotion. We tend to be high on the intellect and the emotion, not so much on the intuition. Someone will look at us, tears in their eyes, talking about how much healthcare is costing them and how they're going to lose everything and how they really, if they, they're like, I think healthcare is a right and I just need someone to take care of it because it's destroying my life. And we go, healthcare is not a right. This is what we lean on because they hit us in our intellect and made us emotionally respond. Healthcare is not a right. There's positive rights and negative rights. You should probably read Rothbard, then you'll know more about what you're talking about because you sound like an idiot right now. And this is a person who just told you they're breaking down and they're telling you that they don't know how they're going to be able to afford to live because they went to an emergency room once. And I'm saying you, me, I've done it before too. We libertarians just showed them that we don't give a damn about them. And so all those stereotypes about us that all we care about is our own money and our own rights and we don't care about anyone else, screw the poor, screw the elderly, screw the children. We kind of gave them a reason to think that's true, but it's not that we don't care. It's that that's how we process stuff. But if instead we meet them where they are, and I learned this in 20 years of owning and operating successful businesses, leadership and communication skills, the way that you reach someone is in their space and from their precept. Yes, healthcare is a mess. Yes, what you've just told me sounds like an absolute nightmare. I'm so sorry you're having to go through this. This system was designed to do that to you, and it's designed for wealthy people to stay wealthy at your expense and to keep you scared so that you don't have other options. This system is designed so that pharmaceutical companies can jack up the price of their decades-old drugs by 100-fold and not introduce new drugs, new better drugs into the market because they're still making money on the old ones that they don't have to pay to do research and development on. And if they do a new one, they just externalize the cost on you with taxpayer funds through the FDA. So all they get is the profit, and they make sure that they can never be sued for it. So they're getting protection, qualified immunity. They're getting protection from lawsuits. They're getting patent protection. They're getting your money to pay for anything new that they're doing, and you're paying a fortune for everything. This system is a mess. We want to completely dismantle it, and then you take them on that journey. And our journey makes more sense than someone going, yeah, this system is a mess. A government created it. They should be in charge of your healthcare and decide if you get it or not. It works. We just have to meet them where they are. Left, right, center, whatever. Meet them where they are, empathize with them, identify their problems, demonstrate that we care, and then take them on the journey to liberty.
Spike Cohen for baby. I love this interview. This was so fun. Is there anything else that we should be talking about before we wrap up here? I mean, you really nailed a lot of really great points in a very concise way. So I'm really looking forward to attempting to get the dodos at Facebook to let me advertise my own freaking show. Somehow, everybody at Fox and CNN, they can do ads, but not me with my $20 budget.
It's like we need your social security number and your birth certificate. Yeah, no, it's crazy. It's crazy.
Unbelievable.
I guess the last thing I want to say is that if you enjoyed this and you know, like we know, that this is what's going to connect with the American people, we need to get on the debate stage. If Jo and I get on that debate stage, Jo against two absolute declining buffoons who can't hide from the fact that they're responsible for this. everything we're facing right now. I didn't even get into how the CDC stopped healthcare workers from testing and treating COVID patients for the first 2 months that it was here, which is why it's as widespread as it is. That's a whole show we could do, where the CDC actually told doctors, do not test or treat anyone for COVID. 2 months they did this. 2 months. If you want someone to get on that debate stage with those two and explain how they and their parties created this problem, and that libertarians and our common sense solutions are the way to solve those problems and make it so that we never have to do that again. If you want me on stage with Mike Pence, who's still deciding whether he thinks government should be able to shock people for being homosexual, and probably Kamala Harris, who illegally withheld exculpatory evidence in a capital murder case. This was a case where a judge told her to release evidence. She was the prosecutor, and the judge told her to release evidence that would exonerate, that would prove that the man that she was trying to have executed was not guilty. And she still tried to withhold it illegally, even after she was ordered to release it. I can't wait to ask her how that's not attempted murder in front of the entire American public. If you want that to happen, we need to, if you get called in the polls, then, tell them you're voting for Jo Jorgensen. Even if you're not sure if you want to vote for us yet, if you just want to get us in the polls, then do it. Tell your friends about us. Tell your family about us. Sign up for us on social media. Share our content. Join the Jo Jorgensen Spike Cohen Facebook group. Do everything that you can to bring people in. Join your local and state and national Libertarian Party. Get the message out there. This is a grassroots campaign. We need every single hand on deck to do this. And we invite you to go to joj2020.com. And you can fill out our volunteer form to become a volunteer. And if you're able to contribute, we would greatly appreciate your contributions. There's a big donate button, and we would appreciate anything that you could give. And Jo Jorgensen and I are fighting for a world set free, and we hope you'll join us. Thank you. And thank you for your time, Tatiana.
Thank you so much. Really enjoyed this interview. Everybody, make sure you go to the site. We're going to have all the links below. And thanks once again for joining us today on the Tatiana Show.
Thank you.
What's the point of all this technology without a little love in our lives? Our hosts, Tatiana Moroz, Dr. Stephanie Murphy, and Lauren Kasovitz, have come together to bring you Proof of Love. Go to proofoflovecast.com. The Tatiana Show has been brought to you by CryptoMediaHub.com, a boutique marketing and PR agency for Bitcoin and beyond. Hey there, it's time for the show, the Tatiana Show, where you make friends and talk life and crypto. We gotta think and reflect and use lots of intellect with our hearts when we work together. I know that it can be so hard out there, looking all around and saying that life ain't fair. So that is why we will fight and stay up late at night, listening to the Tatiana Show. Thank you for listening to the Tatiana Show. Please follow us on Twitter at Queen Tatiana or on Facebook and Instagram at Tatiana Moroz Music. More episodes can be found at thetatianashow.com, and make sure you leave a review on iTunes and tell your friends. You are listening to The Tatiana Show. This show may contain adult content, language, and humor and is intended for mature audiences. If that's not you, please stop listening. Nothing you hear on The Tatiana Show is intended as financial advice, legal advice, or really anything other than entertainment. Take everything you hear with a grain of salt. Oh, and if you're listening to us on an affiliate network, the ideas and views expressed on this show are not necessarily those of the network that you're listening on or of any sponsors or any affiliate products you may hear about on this show.